All right, so let's dive right into this.
Okay.
You know, this political head scratcher you sent our way,
Yeah.
Kamala Harris losing to Donald Trump.
Wow.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got articles,
Right.
even a whole video analysis from DW News,
Okay.
all about how this supposedly impossible upset went down.
It definitely challenges some conventional wisdom, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
The data suggests a much more complex picture
Absolutely.
than the polls predicted.
Yeah.
The DW News piece lays it out pretty starkly.
Mm-hmm.
Trump didn't just win.
Right.
He dominated Pennsylvania, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Even flipped some Latino voters.
Wow.
What happened to the blue wave everyone was talking about?
Well, the video highlights a couple of key factors.
Okay.
First, it seems like a lot of voters felt like the country was headed in the wrong direction. Regardless of the economic indicators,
Okay.
Trump tapped into that sentiment,
Okay.
positioning himself as the change candidate.
But isn't that usually the Democrats' game? How did Harris miss the mark on that?
The video dives into that through interviews with political analysts.
Okay.
One point that stood out
Yeah.
was the suggestion that Harris never really established a strong independent identity as a candidate.
So she was Biden's VP
Right.
and then ascended to the presidency,
Exactly.
but never won a major election on her own.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe she lacked that battle-tested aura
Yeah.
that some voters look for, that she hadn't really proven herself on the campaign trail.
That's one interpretation. The video also suggests that she might have struggled to define a clear vision for the future that resonated with voters seeking change.
Okay, that's interesting. But what about Trump's success?
Yeah.
With groups that typically lean Democrat,
Right.
like Black and Hispanic voters.
Yeah.
The DW News piece really emphasized that.
That's where the analysis gets really fascinating.
Right.
The video brings in an expert, William Glucroft, who argues that looking at voters solely through the lens of race or age is too simplistic.
You mean just because someone is Black or Hispanic
Right.
doesn't automatically make them a Democrat?
Precisely. Glucroft suggests that the Democrats need to move beyond those broad demographic categories and understand the diverse needs and aspirations within those communities. He uses the example of upwardly mobile Black and Hispanic voters who might be drawn to Trump's message of economic opportunity, even if they disagree with him on social issues.
So are the Democrats missing out on a whole segment of voters who are doing well economically, but still feel like the system isn't working for them?
Glucroft seems to think... So he argues that economic anxiety can transcend traditional demographic boundaries.
Okay.
And that's a point worth considering.
Right.
What does it mean for the Democratic Party if they're losing ground
Right.
with the voters who are, on paper, part of their base?
It's almost like the old political playbook doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
You can't just count on certain groups to vote a certain way.
Exactly. This election really throws a wrench into those assumptions.
Yeah.
And it raises some important questions about how parties need to adapt their strategies
Right.
to connect with a more nuanced electorate.
Speaking of shaking things up, the video also highlighted
Yes.
the surge in first-time voters supporting Trump.
Interesting.
What's the takeaway there? Is he tapping into a whole new generation of politically engaged people?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's something both parties need to figure out.
Yeah.
What is it about Trump's message or his style that motivates people who haven't traditionally participated in the political process? Is it a genuine long-term shift?
Right.
Or is it a more fleeting phenomenon tied to Trump's personality?
It's like he's cracked some kind of code that no one else has figured out yet.
Perhaps, but it's also worth noting that this election took place against a backdrop of widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo. Maybe these first-time voters weren't necessarily drawn to Trump himself,
Yeah.
but to the idea of shaking things up,
Interesting.
of rejecting the establishment.
So it could be less about Trump and more about a desire for radical change.
That's certainly a possibility, and it's something to watch closely as we move forward.
Yeah.
Are these new voters here to stay?
Yeah.
Or will they fade away once the novelty of Trump wears off?
Okay, so we've got economic anxiety, a desire for change, and a whole new wave of voters. But let's not forget about the elephant in the room, the economy.
Right.
The video reminds us that even with some positive indicators,
Yeah.
a lot of people just weren't feeling it. Is that what Trump tapped into?
Absolutely. And it's a classic example of how perceptions of the economy can be more powerful than the actual data, at least when it comes to voting decisions.
Yeah.
Even if the overall economy is doing well, if people don't feel like they're personally benefiting, that can translate into political discontent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like Trump really hit a nerve with these voters who felt left behind by the system.
Yeah.
Even if the numbers didn't necessarily back up that feeling.
That's a really important point, and it speaks to the power of narrative in politics.
Right.
Trump was able to create a compelling story about a forgotten America.
Yeah.
And it resonated with people who felt like their struggles weren't being acknowledged.
And speaking of narratives, one thing that jumped out at me from the DW News video was the focus on abortion in Harris's campaign.
Okay.
It felt like they were really banking on that issue to mobilize women voters.
Yes, and it seems that strategy didn't land quite as they'd hoped, particularly with white women voters.
Interesting.
The video highlights this as a potential miscalculation on the part of the Harris campaign.
So it's back to that idea of complexity again.
Right.
You can't assume that all women or all members of any demographic group will vote the same way based on a single issue.
Exactly. And it underscores the need for candidates to connect with voters on multiple levels.
Right.
To understand the nuances of their concerns and aspirations, rather than relying on overly simplistic assumptions.
But it's like what we were saying about those upwardly mobile Black and Hispanic voters.
Exactly.
They might be conservative on economic issues,
right,
but more liberal on social issues, or vice versa.
Exactly.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right, and that's why this election is such a fascinating case study.
Yeah.
It challenges a lot of the traditional assumptions about how American politics works.
Speaking of challenges, the DW News video also touched on the international reactions to Trump's win.
Oh, yeah.
Seems like our allies are a bit nervous, to say the least.
That's understandable. Trump's America First policies and his unpredictable approach to foreign policy created a lot of uncertainty during his first term. It's natural for world leaders to be apprehensive about what a second Trump presidency
might mean for global stability and alliances.
The video even mentioned concerns about potential trade wars and the U.S. pulling out of more international agreements.
Right.
Is that a realistic possibility?
It's certainly within the realm of possibility given Trump's track record.
Yeah.
He's shown a willingness to upend the established order, even if it ruffles some feathers on the global stage.
So it sounds like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what Trump does next.
Yeah.
But what about the impact on domestic issues here in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Did the DW News piece offer any insights on that front?
The video highlighted a few key areas to watch.
Okay.
Healthcare is one.
Okay.
Trump has been a vocal critic of the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
And he might make another attempt to repeal or replace it. That could have significant implications for millions of Americans who rely on it for health insurance.
And what about climate change?
Yeah.
That was a major point of contention during Trump's first term.
Right. And he seems pretty skeptical of the whole thing.
Yes. And that's unlikely to change in his second term.
Yeah.
He pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement.
Right.
And he's expressed doubts about the science behind climate change.
Yeah.
It's safe to assume that environmental policy won't be a top priority for his administration.
It's almost like we're back to square one on that issue.
In some ways, yes, but it's important to remember that even without federal leadership, there's a lot of action happening at the state and local levels, as well as in the private sector.
So there's still hope for progress, even if it's coming from different avenues.
Absolutely. And that's something to keep in mind as we navigate the uncertainties of a second Trump term change can happen from the bottom up, as well as from the top down.
Okay, so we've got economic anxiety, shifting political landscape, global uncertainty, and potential upheaval on key domestic issues.
Yeah.
It feels like we're at a turning point.
I think that's a fair assessment. This election has exposed some deep divisions within American society.
Yeah.
And it's raised some fundamental questions about the direction of the country.
It's almost like we're looking into a mirror and not quite recognizing what we see.
Perhaps, but I think it's also an opportunity for reflection and for dialogue.
Okay.
To really engage with the issues that divide us.
Yeah.
And to search for common ground.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. Challenging times can also be times of great innovation and creativity.
Okay.
It's up to us to decide how we respond to these challenges.
Right.
And what kind of future we want to create.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can we as individuals do to make sense of this complex and uncertain world?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves. And I think the first step is to simply stay informed.
Okay.
To read widely, listen to diverse perspectives, and engage in thoughtful discussions about the issues that matter.
It's like that old saying, knowledge is power.
Exactly. The more informed we are,
Okay.
the better equipped we are to navigate the challenges ahead.
Yeah.
And to make our voices heard.
But being informed isn't enough, right?
Right.
We need to actually do something with that knowledge.
You're absolutely right. Passive observation won't cut it in these times.
Yeah.
We need to engage in our communities, participate in the political process,
Right.
and hold our leaders accountable.
So it's about taking action, making our voices heard, and being part of the solution.
Precisely. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. We all have a role to play in shaping the future we want.
This has been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
It's clear that this election was a wake-up call. A sign that the old political rules might not apply anymore.
I agree. And I think it's an invitation for all of us to engage more deeply with the, complexities of our political system and the forces that shape it.
So rather than feeling overwhelmed by all this uncertainty,
right,
maybe we should see it as a chance to kind of rethink our assumptions and be more proactive in, shaping the future we want.
I like that perspective. It's about reclaiming our agency and recognizing that we're not just passive observers.
Right.
We have the power to influence the direction of our communities,
right,
our country, and even the world.
It's a bit daunting, but also kind of exciting, right?
It is.
Like we're all part of this grand experiment in democracy.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to make it work.
Exactly. And that starts with staying informed,
right,
engaging in thoughtful dialogue, and holding our leaders accountable.
It's about being active citizens, not just spectators.
Precisely. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning.
Right.
It's a spark to ignite your curiosity and inspire you to continue exploring these issues.
So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought and motivated you to stay engaged with the political process.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving for a better world.
Don't forget to like and follow us for more fascinating deep dives into the topics that matter to you.